Yeah, you should take the other microphone.
I have two questions, Bhante, if it's okay. Just this one is not related so much. Is there an equivalent, or the Diamond Sutra? Where does that?
The Diamond Sutra is a Mahayana sutra.
Yeah, but is there an equivalent, or does it originate anywhere in Theravada?
No, it's actually, it's something of a condensation. It's part of the what's called the Prajnaparamita group collection of sutras, and it's a shorter version of the, very short version of the Prajnaparamita. It does make allusions to some ideas that are in the Pali Suttas, especially the idea of the Dhamma as being like a raft taught for going to the other shore. But the sutra itself doesn't have a counterpart.
And the word chan, does that derive from jhana?
Yeah.
It does, right?
Yeah. Originally in Chinese it would have been pronounced chan-na. Chan-na. But then they dropped the, to make it one syllable, they dropped the na, so it just becomes chan. Or often they use chan to indicate the meditative state itself. Right. They'll use chan ding.
Oh, is it dhyana?
Yeah. So the chan is actually, what do you call this, transliteration from, probably it's based on the Sanskrit dhyana rather than Pali jhana, same word. So they take the chan part from Pali Sanskrit, and then ding is the original Chinese word, which means something like fixed or definite. So it indicates like the fixing of the mind in concentration.
Anyone? All right, we can go home.
Bhante, this sutta says the Buddha is from the mother's womb, but I remember, is that the popular belief that the Buddha came out of the armpit?
I think that there are some traditions, some what they call the biographies of the Buddha from a somewhat later period when describing the Buddha's actual birth. They have him coming out from the armpit or from the his mother's side. Maybe there's a kind of among some of the puritanical monks, an aversion towards the idea that the child or the infant couldn't be coming out from the vaginal passage. Yeah, so they have to have like almost like a miraculous birth.
It seems like it's alluding to that. I mean, in a way, I don't want to. It doesn't seem. It seems to make it like more divine than if.
I mean, that's why I say that a lot of, up till the last paragraph of the sutta, it seems that the text here is indicative of a period which is moving towards the glorification of the Buddha. Some will say deification, though he doesn't actually become a god. And then there was one of the schools, the early schools, or a branch of one of the early schools, the Lokuttaravadins, they were called, a branch of the Mahasangika school, held that the real Buddha never takes birth, that the real Buddha remains in a kind of divine realm, always sitting perpetually in uninterrupted samadhi, but out of compassion for deluded beings, the Buddha conforms to the ways of the world by showing himself as taking birth, going through the stage of being unenlightened so that he can enjoy pleasures in the palace, then renouncing, achieving enlightenment, then teaching and passing away into nirvana. But the real Buddha never passes away. He's always enlightened, always sitting in enlightened samadhi. And then this idea, even though it originates in one of the early schools, then it sort of comes into, in a somewhat different form, into some of the Mahayana sutras, particularly the Saddharma Pundarika, the Lotus Sutra.
Any idea why it was chosen to be included in these discourses, being that it's unrelated?
Well, as I said, it seems indicative of a period where the Buddhist community doesn't want to understand the Buddha as an ordinary human being, or having been an ordinary human being. And so there comes a glorification. But looking at this from another point of view, I mean, I don't know the answers. I'm not, I don't have omniscient knowledge of this. But let us suppose that, and I would think that somebody who's going to become the Buddha doesn't do so just by chance, but he has to have had or fulfilled certain excellent qualities over many lives, no? So I would think he's, according to the account of the paramitas, that he's fulfilled, perfected generosity, virtuous behavior, taking the southern list, renunciation, wisdom, truthfulness, and so on. The northern list, including, both have energy, patience, and certainly meditation, wisdom. So he's fulfilled all of these qualities, and I would think, in little babies, you put them in their carriages in a nursery, and they might not look so different, but each little baby is bringing with it a whole backlog of impressions and qualities generated and acquired in past lives. And so I would think that somebody who has fulfilled all of these excellent qualities over so many lives, their birth would not be like that of, Joe Smith, who's just going to be working as an auto mechanic and married with 2 or 3 kids and going to the bar to drink with his friends on Saturday night and playing with his poker group on Sunday afternoon, whatever.
Are you talking about Joe or me?
I don't have anything against auto mechanics. I'm just choosing a...
Anybody?
So we read, if you read the biographies of the great, like the great Buddhist monks of the past, and even of some of the Hindu sages of fairly recent times, like maybe Sri Ramakrishna, or Ramana Maharshi. Their births are not quite like this, but some kind of auspicious phenomena take place at the time of their birth. So I would think, that there are more things between heaven and earth that are dreamt of in our reductionist, materialist philosophies. Yeah, please.
Hi. So first, sorry for my ignorance if my question really sounds like that, very ignorant. I wonder why there is different Buddhism, the Theravada and the Mahayana, and also there is Tibetan, this more secretive way of Buddhism. Why this difference exists, and also like for us, how for example, me, how do I know which one should I study?
Yeah.
And also when I study it, how should I balance my effort from like a scholarly approach, just study Buddhism versus practicing just by meditate? Maybe I don't have to understand any of the theory, but if I practice, I can experience it. So there's this, I can devote my efforts into the scholars type study versus just practice. How should I regard this? Thank you.
Well, these are 2 big questions. Like, it almost takes a whole class or a whole course to deal with them. Okay, first, why there's different forms of Buddhism. Okay, the Buddha taught for 45 years, and even we could see within the circle of the Buddha's disciples, different groups of monks would have different points of emphasis. So some would put a lot of emphasis on quiet meditation, some would put emphasis on wisdom or insight, some specialized in the discipline, the vinaya, others specialized in learning or study of the text. So even during the Buddha's time, there was sort of differences of emphasis according to the different inclinations and temperaments of the people who were being taught. Okay, and naturally as time went by, the Buddhist community spread out over wider areas in India. And then initially, during the early period, say on the essentials of the teaching, there was agreement, but they would have different sort of philosophical interpretations. And so in this way we get, according to the traditional account, 18 schools representing early Buddhism. And we don't know the positions of all 18 schools, but there were about 4 or 5 main schools with different points of emphasis. Okay, then as time went by, then out of some of the early schools, there emerged the form which is now called Mahayana Buddhism, and then new scriptures applied, which are called the Mahayana Sutras, which introduced a new ideal, new philosophical interpretations. And even the Mahayana itself went through about at least 3 waves, each one bringing up new scriptures and new philosophical schools. And so we get, this is still in India, what's called the Madhyamaka school or the middle way school, the Yogacara school, the mind-only school. Then still a later period, sort of new techniques or methods of meditation came to be adopted in the Buddhist communities. And then this led to the emergence of what's called Vajrayana Buddhism or Tantric Buddhism. Then each of these forms of Buddhism, which originate in India, move to a different geographical region. So the only early school that actually survived is the Theravada school, which had moved early to Sri Lanka and then moved to Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos. Okay, then when Mahayana Buddhism became prominent in India, then the Buddhist missionaries moved from northern India over the Silk Road to Central Asia, then from Central Asia to China. And then in China itself, new schools emerged, which sort of adapted the teachings in ways that were more suitable to the Chinese mind. So we get the original Chinese schools like Chan or Zen and the Pure Land school. And then Chinese philosophical schools, Tiantai, Huayan. Okay, and then from China, it moved to Korea, Japan, and this way we get what's now called East Asian Buddhism as it exists today. Then Buddhism, a still later period, 8th century, 9th century, moved up to this was in the Vajrayana stage, moved up to Tibet and then flourished there, and so we have in Tibet actually to some extent all schools of, or all forms of Buddhism in Tibetan Buddhism, but the emphasis is on Vajrayana Buddhism. And so that this way we get like 3 main Buddhist traditions: Southern Buddhism, which is the Theravada school, East Asian, which there's a variety of schools, then Tibetan Buddhism, which itself also differentiated into different schools with some differences of interpretation. Nyingma, Kargyatpa, Gelugpa, Sakyapa. Okay, so that's how, the differentiation takes place as to which one to choose. first I say, to just, explore, learn something about the different schools, and then follow whichever school seems most congenial to one's interest and temperaments. But I think it's important, my opinion is, for Buddhists of all schools to learn the early teachings, because this is like what I would call the fountainhead of the Dharma, the source. And so, unfortunately, what has tended to happen in East Asian Buddhism is that the different schools there would form around particular Mahayana Sutra without putting much emphasis on learning anything else about the broader Buddhist systems. So we get, like the Tian Tai school focuses entirely on the Lotus Sutra. The Pure Land school on the Pure Land Sutras. The Huayan school, I don't know that it exists anymore, but it focuses only on the Avatangsaka Sutra. And so there was a neglect of, so each school would just focus the center around its own particular text and not learning the other, the older, more original teachings. It's somewhat different in Tibetan Buddhism because they preserved at least the Abhidharma systems from the early school, one of the early schools there. So they have a better knowledge of the early Buddhist teachings. But still, they didn't translate the Sutra Pitaka into Tibetan, or the Sutra Pitaka from the early period was not in its entirety translated into Tibetan, only a few individual sutras. But now I think it's important for Buddhists of all the schools to learn the early teachings. And the only school that has a complete collection of the early teachings that survived is the Theravada school. So whether one is following Theravada Buddhism itself, or East Asian Buddhism, or Tibetan Buddhism, I say it's important to learn the suttas from the Pali Canon. Even I heard that the Dalai Lama has commissioned a number of monks to go to study Pali very intensively in order to be able to translate the Pali suttas into Tibetan. And now there's like a big project in Taiwan to translate the Pali Canon again into Chinese. There was an earlier translation done, I think, through the Japanese translation, but Chinese readers say that it's not so clear. Is that how you put it? Not so accurate also. Okay, then what kind of balance to strike between study? You don't have to practice Buddhism, you don't have to become a Buddhist scholar. But my belief is that to practice, one should know the fundamental teachings and get a sort of clear idea of the fundamental teachings of Buddhism. The idea, some people say, don't study anything, just meditate. But that gives you a limited perspective, I think. Because otherwise it's a little bit like, I'd say, like driving a car without maybe trying to drive a car from New York to California without using a map and refusing to look at any road signs. So you just keep your eye on the road ahead of you and just drive down any street you choose at random, then you can just be going in circles and not get any place. So if you're going to drive the car, you should use a map, whether a paper map or well, actually nowadays, I'm afraid you put on the GPS. Okay, in our example, the person refuses to use a GPS also. Because now you don't have to read the text, you listen to discourses on the internet, and then you're still getting guidance. Richard. And also take the microphone, can be passed back.
Yeah, there's a doctrine, right, that that after that is once one enters the stream, right, that then you are assured to become an arahant within 7 lifetimes, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, what I'm wondering is, last week we talked about Sutta 122, and it's about the undoing of teachers and pupils.
Yeah.
And it seems to say that, the undoing can go as far as, becoming an animal, going into a hell realm, and all of that kind of thing. What I'm wondering is, if a stream enterer is guaranteed to become an arahant within 7 lifetimes,
Yeah.
how do they deal with 122? Because if a teacher can be so undone that he enters the hell realm and so on, he's not going to get a chance there to become an arahant, right?
Yeah.
So what if he does this in his 6th lifetime? He can't be reborn as a human in his 7th lifetime in order to become an arahant if he's going to a hell realm first, right?
But this is somebody who hypothetically is a stream enterer, a sotapanna?
Well, I'm saying he talks about on page 976, right? He says in paragraph 22, and how does a teacher's undoing come out?
Yeah.
Now, doesn't a teacher have to be a stream enterer?
No.
No?
No.
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 Oh, now I'm really surprised.
First of all, when this passage is speaking about the teacher's undoing, he's not referring to a teacher in the lineage of the Buddha. He's speaking about somebody, it can be from any school of thought or any system of any kind of contemplative system, who becomes an eminent meditation master. He's not to become a Buddha.
So a teacher is not a Buddhist teacher? It's like a meditation, in other words, a Hindu.
Well, in the time of the Buddha, there was not Hinduism as we know it today.
Well,
but
no, it was
this
Brahmanism.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So this would be, it could be a teacher from the Brahminic camp, or a teacher from one of the samana, the ascetic communities.
Yeah.
Or it can be perhaps a Buddhist teacher as well. But to become a Buddhist teacher, one doesn't have to be a stream enterer, not at all.
No.
No.
Oh. I'm still amazed. Really? Okay. All right.
Yeah. Well, there's a term, seika, which can be translated a learner or trainee. And that means one who has reached at least the level of the path of stream entry, usually a stream enterer, once returner, non-returner. But that doesn't mean that anybody who is learning the Dhamma or practicing the Dhamma is therefore a seika and therefore a stream enterer. Yeah, so you've learned something new today, Richard. Okay, see you, Sam. Then we'll have to end for the day. Oh, and Poe.
Bande, today something puzzled me on section 22, the last section that the Buddha, actually you said rejoins, the rejoinder.
Oh, yeah.
Why did, and you said actually a similar instruction, also rather similar section appears in others elsewhere in the Sutta Pitaka as well. So there's these three, the feelings, the perception, and the thoughts. But why did he keep the other two of the aggregates out of this?
Yeah, this isn't actually, though two of the factors mentioned here represent two of the aggregates, but thoughts is not explicitly identified with with any of the aggregates.
Oh, in
So-
part, sorry.
Though normally it's included within the sankhara khanda, the aggregate of volitional activities. But it seems that this is not the scheme of the aggregates here. It's just 3 types of mental events. Okay, Sam? No, this has nothing to do with the word Arya. This is Acharya. It just means usually something which is, when we say wonderful, it's not in the sense of excellent, but rather maybe we should say wondrous, in that it's something that's beyond the ordinary events, something which is sort of bordering on the miraculous, something which is astounding, mind-boggling, mind-blowing. And abbūta has similar meaning. They're often used when somebody exhibits a feat of psychic power, you know. Yeah, a display, something which transcends the domain of ordinary events in the human sphere. Named. Yeah, that is a different word. That is that's probably acharya. Yeah, there's a word which means teacher, which is acharya. And this is acchariya, which means, as I said, wondrous, astounding, marvelous in the true sense of a marvel. Okay. Bowe. Put it on.
Bhante, my question is about the efficacy when I pray to the Buddha in the Theravada tradition, because the Buddha say, this is my last birth,
Yeah.
right? And we don't know if the Buddha exists after his Nibbana or not.
Yeah.
The issue is irrelevant. So my question is, I think I asked Bhante this question years before. So when we say Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa, it's just like I'm making a phone call and the other end there's no person to answer the phone call at all, because I met Bhante as a Mahayana Buddhist, and then over years I dropped my Buddhas from the Mahayana tradition one by one. So even in the Theravada tradition, we recollect the Buddha, but even when I recollect the Buddha, it's just the recollect of the Buddha's good qualities. So there's nobody over there that I can rely on. Is that so? And since there's no way to check, so I would think, well, because I'm not a strong-willed person, maybe it's safer for me to be a Mahayana Buddhist, because there are so many Buddhas, numerous Buddhas over there, and I feel empowered every morning when I wake up.
Yeah.
But if I follow the Theravada tradition, I have to be self-reliant, right? Is there just when I make pray to the Buddha, what would happen in the Theravada tradition?
I have my own understanding of this. That even though the Buddha as an individual sort of comes to an end, but what happens is that the Buddha becomes the Dharma in a sense. And the Dharma preserves, it's sort of like an immensity of power, spiritual power. So when one directs one's mind towards the Buddha as sort of the physical or personal representation of the Dhamma, if one has the good intention or a noble, worthy aspiration, one is drawing upon an immense power source which is helping to promote the fulfillment of that aspiration. But it doesn't mean that the aspiration can be fulfilled without personal effort on one's own part. And if one sort of prays to the Buddha asking for selfish things, maybe it's not going to work, because then the aspiration is corrupted by greed, aversion, or by greed. So, Bhante, I don't want to be driving the Toyota anymore. May I wake up in the morning and find a Mercedes in my driveway? Or I'm playing the stock market. Bhante, may my stocks go up in value. Or Bhante, I don't know. May my son do well in school. May he get all A's. Even though he doesn't study, he just goes to the tavern. That's not going to work. But if one makes good aspirations, Bhante, may I be able to learn and understand the meaning of the texts, or may I be empowered to be able to help others and benefit others, then I think it's going to be, something's going to happen. So this is what they speak of. I think they use the Chinese words. One means like call or invitation, then the other is the response. Is it ying?
Ying.
Ying. Fourth tone. Ying. The call, I don't remember the word for that. Is it yuan, meaning vow? Yuan. Yuan and Ying. Yeah, so it works, I think. How it works, it's something that boggles the mind, but it works. Okay, we take one more. Because, yeah, this is what we call the what we call this the anubhava of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So, for example, when we recite blessings, we recite like, Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba buddhanubhavena sabba dhammanubhavena sabba sanganubhavena. So this is sort of appealing to or drawing upon the anubhava, the spiritual might. So even though the Buddha, as a human being, passes away into nirvana, but there's still the anubhava of the Buddha still continues, that spiritual power. Okay.
Yes, Bhante. Regarding the earlier question that was asked, when I was, I'm originally a Theravada Buddhist.
Yeah.
For me, Buddhism is common. You believe in anicca, dukkha, anatma,
Yeah.
the Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, the Four Divine Abodes, Metta, Karuna, Mudita.
Yeah.
All this is common to all the
Yeah.
Buddhist
Yeah, that is true,
religions.
yeah.
And once you live by that, the whole world is part of your family, and
Yeah.
it is, with the loving kindness for each other.
Yeah.
So the small differences between the different, Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, it doesn't matter. In fact, for me, growing up as a Theravada Buddhist, we used to think Vajrayana was different or Mahayana was different. And a friend of mine said, Ravi, here is a VHS of the Dalai Lama on the Dhamma discussion, on Dhamma preaching on the Four Noble Truths.
Yeah.
I listened to it. He said, listen to it. I listened to it. I could have sworn it's a Theravada monk who was giving it.
Mm-hmm.
It was identical. It was identical.
Yeah.
And that is the time I realized that all these small differences, that they are, each one can follow their own,
Yeah.
but it is already coming from one Buddha.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
a really
I mean, the
no
fundamental teachings
contradiction.
are the
Exactly,
same. So
Bhante.
there are differences in emphasis
Yeah,
and sort of
exactly.
the unfolding of the systematic philosophy. Just before we close, I just want to mention that there's sort of related to this sutra, it just occurred to me, I should have mentioned this earlier, but it just came back to my mind. There are two suttas back to back in the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fours. It could be something in the area of, gee, the number of the sutta doesn't come back. Somewhere in the 50s, maybe, 60s. They're both called Wonderful and Marvellous, the same title. In the first one, the Buddha speaks about 4 wondrous and marvelous things, and that is when the Buddha was born, when he attained enlightenment. It has to be while he's still alive. When he gives his first discourse, the great marvelous light surpassing the splendor of the gods appears. The conception, birth. I think it's conception, birth, enlightenment, and turning the wheel of the Dharma. He can't give in the discourse, he can't speak about the light appearing when he attains final nirvana because he's still alive. So those are the 4: conception, birth, enlightenment, and first discourse. So that's the first sutta. Then the sutta that comes right after that, he speaks about another 4 wonderful and marvelous things. That is, let's see how it goes. Okay, this people in the world are sort of governed by attachment, motivated by attachment, but when the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma for the sake of non-attachment, people become interested, they lend an ear, and they try to understand. Then the second one is, people in the world are for the most part sort of driven by conceit, governed by conceit, but when the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma for the purpose of demolishing conceit, people become interested, they lend an ear, and they want to understand. Then the third is, people in the world, for the most part, their minds are restless and agitated, and when the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma for the sake of peace, they want to understand. And then the fourth is that when the people in the world are for the most part enveloped by ignorance, but when the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma for the sake of wisdom or knowledge, then they become interested, they lend an ear, they try to understand. You know, so we have like here, in those 2 suttas, there's a sort of antithesis of 2 kinds of wondrous and marvelous qualities. One, the first one, are what we would call ordinarily miracles in worldly terms. You know, supernatural light appearing on these important occasions. Then the second set are the miracles that occur in connection with the Buddha's instruction. Okay, I think we have to end for the day. So we'll end with 3 half bows.